Hi everyone, I'm Jenna, and today I'm going to share with you my top 10 books of 2019. Now you're probably wondering why this video is up so late in the year, and there are several reasons for this. Now the first reason is that I try to put my books in order from least favorite to most favorite, and every time I would try to do that, the books would change, and eventually I got frustrated with this, so I abandoned it for a while, and then my mental health and emotional state was just not doing too well, so I didn't really feel like making videos, let alone do stuff creative, so I didn't make the video for a while. And now that it's almost April, when I'm going to be participating in a very exciting readathon, I knew that I needed to get this video up as soon as possible. So here we are today with my top 10 books of 2019. Now, as you have guessed, probably, that the books I'm going to show you are the only order that this list has is that my top 3 books are just a little higher than the rest of the books. That's it. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into discussing my favorite books of last year. So the first book I want to talk about is Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend by Matthew Dix. And this is a book about Max, who is 8 years old, and he has this imaginary friend called Boudreaux, and Boudreaux has been alive for 5 years, and Boudreaux is helping Max navigate life, like bullies at school and the cafeteria and home life. And not only that, Boudreaux has to help him with what's her name, Miss Patterson, and that whole situation, because Miss Patterson gets the idea in her head that she can help Max more than anyone else can, so she kidnaps him. And Boudreaux is the only one that knows what happened to Max, and he's trying to figure out how to sort of rescue him from the situation when he can't talk to anyone except Max and imaginary friends. That's basically this book. Now let's get on to what I liked about this book. And one of my favorite aspects about this book was that it was narrated in the imaginary friend's perspective. And I just found that to be very fascinating and a really great idea, because it made you really believe that imaginary friends are real, like ghosts or something. And I found that to be a very smart idea on Matthew Dix's part. And I also love Boudreaux's character development, because at the beginning we find him having this sort of mentality of wanting to stay alive and not have Max forget him, so he would do various things to keep Max invested in him, because he's seen what not thinking about your imaginary friend can do to imaginary friends, because they just go poof into nothing, and Boudreaux doesn't want that to happen. But as the story progresses, you'll find him sort of switching that mentality and thinking that maybe the only way to save Max is to put his own feelings aside about Max not believing him, and maybe Max not believing him might be the only way to get him to safety and escape. So I just really like this book, and if you're new to the adult fiction genre, then I would highly recommend this book, since it's about an 8-year-old kid and imaginary friend. Then the next book I want to talk about is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Now, this book has on my shelf, I believe, since the second book came out. So I've had this book for a while and just finally got around to reading it, and I absolutely loved it, which is why it is on this list. Now, if you're one of those people that somehow don't know what this is about, let me tell you. This is about Selena Saradotian, hopefully I said that right, and she's an assassin. And at the very beginning of the book, we find her in these mines, and they're these mines where the very bad criminal people go and they work in them. And she's been there for a year. And the king has sort of ordered out of the mines so that he can participate in this competition to become his assassin, potentially. And it's just not totally about the competition because murders start happening and no one really knows why they're happening, who's doing it, and how it's even possible to do the murders and get away with it because there's a whole bunch of security at this castle and it shouldn't be possible that this is happening undetected. And I just really love that aspect of it because it added something else than just having it be about this competition. And I also love the writing style of this book. I loved that it was written in such a way that was complex but was also easy to read at the same time, which allowed me to fly through this book. And there's also a love triangle aspect to this book, which I'm not going to say is involved in that because I think it's fun to find out. And I'm not sure who I'm rooting for yet, but hopefully I can get a more sense of the characters in the next book and maybe I'll have a better idea of who I want to end up with who. So if you're like me and I'm one of those that haven't read of this book yet, I would highly recommend that you do. Now the next book that I want to talk about is Sadie by Courtney Summers. And this book is written in two perspectives. So our first perspective is, of course, Sadie's perspective. And she has run away from home in order to track down her younger sister Maddie's killer and avenge her. And she thinks she knows who it is. And we got this other perspective of West McCrae, and he does podcasts and he gets recruited to find out why Sadie ran away and where she is before something maybe terrible happens to her. And he does this through his new podcast called The Girls, where he interviews people to figure out where she might have gone. And this was really, really good. Before I get into what I liked about it, I'm going to talk about the fact that I didn't read this book. I actually listened to this via audiobook, and I thoroughly enjoyed it that way because it made the podcast element come to life in a way that you couldn't get if you were just reading it. What I liked about this book was that our two perspectives, Sadie's and Wes McCrae's perspective, never met up. And I thought that was fascinating because normally we have two perspectives. They sort of interact at some point and they didn't here, which I thought was interesting. And I also liked that Sadie had this stutter, which I haven't read in a book at all. And I thought that was very fascinating. I was really invested in this book. I loved the writing of it. I loved the whole mission aspect to find out where she's going and who is the guy that she thinks it is and all that. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend it, especially via audiobook. So the next book I want to talk about is Dig by A.S. King. And this one is a little hard to explain, but I'll try. So this is about the Hemmings family. So we follow the grandparents, their children, and their children's children. And this book kind of starts off with the grandparents back in the day having this farm, not just any farm, but a potato farm. And they decide to sell it, and what they get from that, they decide not to give to their children or grandchildren because they want them to sort of fend for themselves. And throughout this book, we see how that sort of works and how some of them are estranged from their parents and all that. But eventually at the very end, they all come together and it's like this family reunion thing, and it was really, really good. Now, some part of this book, for me, I got a little confused by, and I think that was because A.S. King puts, I guess you call it surrealism, or like these slight magical elements in her contemporaries. And so when stuff would happen, I'd have to kind of use imagination and stuff for what was happening. But eventually I got the hang of it and really, really loved this book, which is why it's on this list. I loved all the grandkids that we saw, because instead of knowing their names, which you find out later on, at the beginning they're only known as, they're like crutches and things that sort of define them. Like this one kid who carries a shovel around, and he's known as a shoveler. And this girl works at a Arby's, the drive-through there, and she's called Can I Help You? And I thought that was really fascinating. Look at that. And I also really liked A.S. King's writing, because it's just on a whole nother level. And some things I would be reading, I literally have this whoa moment, and really wish that I could have written that, because it's just mind blowing. So the next book I'm gonna talk about is part of a series, and that book is In an Absent Dream by Sienna Maguire. And this book is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series. Now I'm not going to be talking too much about this book in particular because of spoilers, but just know that this series is about children that find magical doors to magical worlds and go through these doors and find that the magical world that they found gets them more than the real world did. And then, after living there for a while, they get kicked out. And they have to deal with living in the real world. And that's where this boarding school for wayward children comes in. It finds these children and they live here so they can cope and be around other kids that are experiencing the same problems. And the first book and 3rd book follow a bunch of kids from the Wayward Children's home and the adventures they get up to. And the 2nd book and the 4th book, which is one I'm holding in my hands right now, is pretty much prequels, which feature a different kid from the Wayward Children's home, and it follows them, how they grew up, how they found their doors, what the doors was like, and ultimately how they got kicked out. And these prequel ones are the ones that I love the best, because I think it has a little bit more of a fantasy element to it, and I just find that the worlds that we explore are just very, very fascinating. And there's no exception with this one, because this one, Blondie, she finds a world all about logic and rules called the Goblin Market. And it fits it perfectly, and I just love like the rules and the system with it, and how if you do stuff wrong and everything, you start turning into like a bird and stuff, and you can lose yourself in there. So I thought that was cool, and I also love the aspect that Lundy could actually go back to the real world and then come back to the Goblin Market anytime she wanted to. But until she got, I forget the age, but it was one for birthdays. They're like, once you get there, you have to decide which world you want to be in, and then that's the world you stay in. And I found that to be really cool, and I like that all the books are just really complex while being really short at the same time. Now, the last book I want to talk about before I get to my top 3 books is Since You Were Gone by Morgan Matson. And this book is a novel all about Emily and Salone, who are best friends. And Emily is the sort of shy wallflower type of person, and Salone is more of the outgoing one in their friendship. And at the beginning of the novel, we find out that Salone is missing, and we don't know exactly where she is, until Emily receives a letter in the mail from Sloane. And it basically has this bucket list of things that she needs to do. For instance, like picking apples at night, dance until dawn, and kiss a stranger, and go skinny dipping, stuff like that. And basically, this is not new for Sloane to do, because Sloane has made Emily these sort of bucket lists before, but they've been a little more outrageous. And this one feels a little more obtainable, so she decides to do this, and maybe possibly doing this, she can figure out what happened to Sloane. So that's basically the plot of this book. And I think the reason why I loved it so much was the fact that I really identified with Emily, because she is a wallflower type character, and some of the things that she needed to do were sort of out of her comfort zone and stressful, which might not be for other people that aren't wallflowers and such. And so I liked that aspect. I also liked that even though Sloane wasn't a part of this book, really, you did get flashbacks of situations that Emily and Sloane were in, and those situations sort of affect how Emily does the lists. It's a really great story. Now, the first book in my top 3 books is Illuminated, which is book 1 in the Illuminated Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. And this book is a sci-fi which has a very, very unique format that I've not seen in really any book that I've read so far. So kudos to Amy and Jay for creating this great format. And this format is basically a collection of files like interviews, IMs, field reports, and various things like that, all in this book, and found that to be fascinating. And this book takes place in the year 2575, and 2 rival mega corporations are at war over a planet that's little more than an ice-covered speck at the edge of the universe. Too bad nobody thought to warn the people living on it, with enemy fire raining down on them. Exes, Katie and Ezra, who have just become exes at the beginning of this book, really, kind of the 2 main perspectives that we follow, are barely even talking to each other and are forced to fight their way onto these 3 fleeing ships with a whole bunch of other people, and they end up being on 2 different ships, and it's about them talking to each other and figuring out what the heck is going on and all that, because even though the fleet has come and destroyed the planet, it's also in pursuit of these 3 ships because they don't want any survivors. And it's all them trying to stay alive. I really loved Caddy and Ezra. They were great to read from their respectives, and obviously I hated the AI. He was just annoying, and I think that's how you're supposed to perceive him because of the horrible things that he does. It's just a very great story. So the second book in my top 3 books is book 1 in the Shades of Magic series, called A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. And this book is a fantasy novel all about 4 alternating Londons. We have this guy Cal, who is a very rare person that can travel through these Londons, because he has, I guess, something in his DNA that allows him to do it or something. I forget the exact reason, but he can travel through the Londons, and he does this to send notes to kings and queens of each of the Londons. And there are Grey London, White London, Red London, where Cal's from, and Black London. And Black London has been cut off from the rest of the Londons because something terrible happened there. And at the beginning we find Cal taking objects from each of the Londons which he's not supposed to do. And someone finds out about this and tries to give him some dangerous thing from Black London. And he wants no part of it, but ends up getting it in his possession anyways. And so he has to try to come up with a plan to get that dangerous object back to Black London. And it's most likely a one-way trip. Then our other perspective is this girl, Delilah Bard, and she is this thief, a very good one, and all her life she's been on her own, and all she wants is to become a pirate and have her own ship. But she stumbles across Cal, and their worlds collide, and they have to sort of work together to figure out what to do with this object that needs to go back to Black London. And I really love this book a whole lot. I loved the writing aspect of it. I loved the story and the plot. Even though it was a little bit slow at the beginning, I didn't really mind that, but I know some people might, so I'm just saying that now. Loved it even though it was slow at the beginning, and then when the artifact from Black London was introduced, that's when the story really took off, because there was a major plot thing going on, because it just was so fascinating, so gripping, and I just wanted to know what the heck was going on, and if they were going to get caught with this thing from Black London, or if they're able to get it back there or what. So it was really fascinating, and I cannot wait to read the next volume sometime soon. Now the final book that I want to talk about is a book that I read twice last year. The first time I read it was on my Kindle app on my iPad, and then I read it in physical form soon after, and loved it both times. And I think that's why it's number one on this list, and that book is this book of poems called Water Runs Red by Jenna Claire. Now, for this book, I'm going to be reading you a review that I wrote soon after I read it the first time. That's on Goodreads, because I want to give you my initial thoughts that I had then. So, let me pull it up my phone here. So, as said before, this is a book of poems by Jenna Claire, who is a fellow YouTuber, and she's one that I've been following for years. She's great, and so is this book, which is really well done considering she self-published it. So what is this book about? Well, it's about friendship, losing friends, asexuality, and a little bit of God and religion, with a thread of fantasy running through each of the poems. Along with each of the poems are photographs that Jenna has taken herself that bring the poems to life. Besides photography, there are many other things that I really liked about this book, like the choice of font. Now, I know this is a weird thing to talk about, but just go with me here. I feel like the font she went with was just adds something to the overall feel of the book. It's similar to the Times New Roman font, which is easy to read, but this new font that she had this handmade quality to it, and it worked perfectly with her aesthetic, which was a journal. And I still can't believe that her friend created this font. And the other thing I liked about this book was there were hidden things in her poems that reference things like Full House, Taylor Swift, and Friends. And when I say that, I mean the show. And there are a whole bunch of other things that she referenced as well. And it's kind of like a miniature scavenger hunt that the reader has to go on, which I think is totally genius. And obviously, I liked all the poems in this book. To be honest, I don't think there was a poem I didn't like. They're all fantastic, and I'm going to share with you a few of the poems in this book that I really, really enjoyed, so you can taste it for writing. First one goes like this. My life became a countdown clock ticking away one TGIF at a time, because you convinced my brain that the present could no longer fulfill me. You pushed me to look ahead, because our future was all that mattered, and we both believed we'd have a happy ending. It wasn't until I watched you walk towards the sunset without me that I finally realized I'd wished away my life to be by your side. 720 days. And the second poem is, we tiptoed into unassuming silences, allowing each other to merely exist, not asking for words, not asking for answers, not asking for anything but a moment in time where we can breathe together. And then the last poem, Milkshakes and Mixtapes. Our friendship manifests in milkshakes and mixtapes, and soon-to-be-forgotten jokes and not-so-awkward silences. Sometimes we sit together in separate worlds, connected by a single thread of shared memory. In your smile, I see a life well lived. In your laugh, I hear 1,000 symphonies. You are the melody that always brings me back to small-town reminders of the kind of teenager I wish I could have been. So, hopefully that gives you a taste of her writing and can see why I really, really love this book. So, yeah, that runs out this video for today. I really like seeing all my books that I loved from last year, and I hope to see you soon in a new video. Bye!